living sober. Hi, everybody. If you're back, welcome. So good to see you. And if you're here for the first time, I'm so glad you're here. I hope you like it. And please subscribe to my channel. It would really help me. And I do have a Patreon as well. And go to patreon.com/busy living sober. And if you go to my website, Busy Living Sober, you can sign up for my newsletter, which will come into your inbox every Friday. All right, that's enough of me. I'm really excited, you guys, to have this guest on. And I say that a lot of times, but this time I kind of really mean it because I get sent a lot of books, as you guys can imagine. And a lot of people reach out to me all the time saying, can I come on your show? Can I come on your show? And I'm always like, I don't know. I got to read or whatever, figure it out. And now I'm getting a little more picky, which is kind of nice. And I met Deb through a listener named Dana, and I'm not going to say her last name because I don't want to give up her anonymity or anything, but Dana reached out to me and she said, I have this friend who just wrote this book. You've got to reach out to her. And of course, if a listener says you've got to reach out to somebody, I say, all right, I got to do it because you guys support me and I want to support you guys. And the book is called One Little Pill: The Chase, the Crash, the Choice. My Journey from Addiction and Darkness to Purpose and Life. And it's by Deb Lawless-Miller, who's here today. And Deb, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad that you had the strength and the courage to write this book. And I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to read the book. I'm sure you get inundated, but yeah, it's pretty special to me, and I'm glad that we're here to talk about it.
It's really, here we are, and everybody knows this. We're in the precipice of one of the biggest elections of our, at least of our lifetime. And last night, and I'm recording this a little bit, as you guys can tell, like a week before it's dropping, almost 2 weeks before it drops. And last night, there was a woman that was talking about her child and how he died of a fentanyl overdose at the RNC convention last night. And wow, was it moving? And your story, I mean, it sounds like from the beginning when you met your husband, it was like, for one, he was darling. I want to say that. Adorable man. God rest his soul. We all know he's here with us still, just not physically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what a beautiful story, because you came from a nice family, right? You weren't from, go ahead and why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I grew up in Avon, Connecticut, which is, the suburbs of Hartford. It's a beautiful little quaint New England town. And I grew up with a mother and father and two older brothers, very family unit. I mean, it was a lovely upbringing. And I then met my husband later in life. Well, we knew each other growing up because we both spent our summers in a little beach town in Connecticut. So we knew each other growing up, but then we started dating when we were both out of college and reconnected. And he came from, a nice family. Also, I knew his family very well. He knew my family. We all was very happy, and it was like the perfect match. And I liked to drink growing up. I was like, I'd party and go out on the weekends with my friends and whatever. It wasn't anything that I didn't wake up the next day like craving alcohol, but I loved the feeling. Okay. So one particular night we were partying, and I had a massive hangover the next day. And a friend of ours who was at the party and was with us the next morning gave me he said, are you allergic to any medication? I said, I don't think so. And he said, try this. This will make you feel better. And he gave me a Vicodin. And I had never had painkillers before. I'd never had any kind of opioid, but man, that washed over me. And I was like, love this feeling. And same happened with my then fiance. Same reaction. And we were both like, wow, this is a great feeling. And then throughout the years, we ended up getting married, and we ended up recreationally using opioids, pain, just pills, and it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but it became, I personally became very dependent on it very quickly. It was just my chemistry was how it worked. And so I was in trouble with those early on in our marriage, and ended up going through a detox. It was pretty brutal, and getting to the other side of it. I didn't know it was a detox though. I just ran out of the pills and was violently ill for an extended amount of time, and then got better. And then at that point is when, we were married, we were living outside of Philadelphia. Life was really, really good. And, we tried to start a family. We did not have luck with that. So we endured years of infertility treatments. And right as I finally got pregnant through IVF, and as soon as, so we were living in Philly, I was pregnant, our families were still in Connecticut. My ex-husband traveled a lot for work. So I'm like, when the baby comes, I want to be near family. So he ended up getting transferred. We moved to Connecticut, and I was 5 months pregnant when my husband at the time received news that he had colon cancer. And that news broke him. Like, he was absolutely, I mean, he went from being like a beautiful provider, husband, friend, could not wait to be a father, to being like, this is the end of my life. I'm going to die. And yeah, I'm going down with a fight. And I was like, you're not going to die. You need surgery, but you'll be okay. Well, what I didn't know at that time was that not only had he still been abusing opioids up until this point, but he had at that point, years later, find out that, he had kind of a psychotic break. So he had an episode of a bipolar, which none of us really knew what bipolar was. And we certainly didn't know he had a mental health issue. We just thought that he was coming undone by the news of his cancer. And his addiction took off, just absolutely took off at that point. He did obviously survive the surgery, and he was cancer free, and everybody, I had the baby, and we were kind of managing, getting on with life. But by this time, between him abusing the substances before the cancer diagnosis, getting the cancer diagnosis, having a mental health issue, and then all of the pain meds that were thrown at him because of the surgeries that he needed, he was just out of, he just could not control his addiction anymore. And a lot of us, when we're in such a state, we're not ourselves anymore. First of all, he was dealing with, like I said, a bipolar episode. So you go up, 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 and you go down, 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 and you have all these manic phases. And he was trying to self-medicate himself through those. And then, the pills turned into alcohol, turned into this, that, the other thing. And it just was clear that our marriage was not going to work out, because violence ensued, and it wasn't a safe place for Hunter, my son, and I anymore. So we left. But before I left, I was in such a state of distress that I decided that I knew that if I indulged in alcohol and pills, that the emotional pain of what was happening would go away. I wouldn't care anymore. I'd be like, whatever, do what you want. I'll be fine. I've got this baby. We're going to make it on our own. I had the family support, but it was so surreal to everybody what was happening, because my ex wasn't himself, and his behavior was out of character. And then I start self-medicating. And so we tried to keep it, as addicts and alcoholics do, we want to keep out of the spotlight. We don't want anybody knowing what we're up to or calling us out, because then we're going to have to get help. And we don't want to let go of our safety blanket, right? we want to keep drinking and drugging, because for me, it was like I just could not see a life without some kind of substance, some kind of coping mechanism. It's the only one I knew. So fast forward, we end up getting divorced, and I, he goes his way and I go my way, but my addiction really takes off. And so the next thing you know, like this kind of girl next door that never got in any trouble. Like I hate speaking up for myself. I hate any kind of confrontation. I just would rather live a little quiet life where everybody's happy around me. This girl that has been like that her whole life is now, going into pharmacies and forging fake prescriptions and getting arrested and getting fired from jobs. And now I'm looking at, I've got 6 felonies that I'm facing, and I'm out of options for getting my drugs.
I have to interrupt real quick because I'm just like the entire time, I'm like shaking my head. And I have to tell you that I remember when I would go in the beginning to AA meetings back in the day, and I would be shaking I'd see people around me shaking their head when someone was telling their story. And I am like sitting here like one of those people. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I want to go back and touch on a couple things before we go forward. For one, the drinking that you started in the very beginning. What year did you graduate from high school?
86.
Okay, so you're 1 year ahead of me. My best friend graduated in 86. I graduated in 87. So we're the exact same age.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of interesting when some people pick up pills, because I don't remember our moms doing drug. Like, do you know what I mean? Like today,
Yeah.
everybody's on everything, right? Your kids,
Like,
kids
yeah.
see their moms on anxiety. Everybody's got anxiety. I gotta take this.
Yeah.
But I feel like at our age group, nobody was really taking, like our parents weren't taking pills. Like it wasn't a regular thing. Like
No.
mom was not like, as much as that song, Mother's Little Helper,
Well,
our,
there's little helpers. Yeah.
yeah, but I don't remember my mom doing that, right? Do you?
No. No, I remember a lot of drinking,
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
drinking. Yeah, it was all about the alcohol. I never knew, and that's again why I became, all of a sudden I'm like, I've got a problem, and I don't know anybody else who does, because it wasn't around us.
No, and there were no solutions. Like I remember seeing when my mom would have like my parents had a lot of cocktail parties. Our age group was definitely the parents getting all
Yeah.
dressed up at their houses, pulling out the good china, the good crystal, and everybody's all dressed up
Yeah.
and they're happy, right?
Yeah.
They maybe have a cigarette in their hand, and mom looks really happy because she has the cocktail. So the first time you drink, you're like, up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's when we would start drinking, when they'd have their cocktail party, and we would be like grabbing the, glasses that are half full or the bottle, and then sneak it up to our room because it was out and it was available and everybody was drinking and nobody noticed the kids. And that's where I started,
I agree. That's why. And when the pills, it must have been kind of, I would imagine that first time somebody handed you that pill, it must have been kind of scary. Like, wait a minute, I've never done this before. Like, I mean, I don't even remember us taking Tylenol or Advil. Was it even around when we were kids?
it was, it's funny that you say that because my mom, and we can laugh now because I'm okay. But growing up, it was always, no matter what complaint I had, it was like, all right, we'll take a couple Advil and go to bed. Like Advil, pills just changed everything. And like the Advil was gonna, save me from everything that I was suffering with, whether it was a bad breakup and I was crying over it, or, I hurt my hand, whatever. It was like, just take a couple Advil. It was, and it's still to this day, my mom will be like, well, maybe you just need a couple Tylenol and go to bed. I'm like, no, we don't need to pop pills to go, to make ourselves feel better. Sometimes you do take a Tylenol or whatever, but yeah, it was just one of those things. But no, I never knew anybody growing up that was into like cocaine or pills. But then again, like when would we, it's not like Mrs. Jones from next door is going to be like, coming out of her pocketbook to pop a pill at a cocktail party. So they were probably doing that. We just never knew it or saw it, So
Exactly. And I also wanted to bring up, I remember correctly that your husband had had cancer when he was a child as well?
Yes. Yes. So that was big. So he was 14 years old when he had colon cancer, which is like unheard of at that age. They thought he had an appendicitis, they thought he had Crohn's disease, all this stuff. And then finally, they discovered that he had a tumor on his colon. So every year he would need to get colonoscopies. It turns out that it's a genetic, it's a genetic mutation that it was in his family. And later on, we'll learn that Hunter, my son, had carried that same gene, but it showed up in a different kind of cancer. But yeah, so he had it then, and then he was, getting colonoscopies every year, and then every 2 years, whatever. And then that 1 year, he skipped getting a colonoscopy because we were moving and I was pregnant and all this stuff. And when he finally went in for the colonoscopy, there was a couple other tumors in there. And so he really felt like he honest to God thought that he was going to die. And he felt like I'm gonna, like, a lot of people will come through that experience being like, oh my God, I'm so grateful I'm alive. I'm gonna do the best I can and make the life da 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 da. He came through it like life is brutal and it's robbing me. And so I'm gonna do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. And I don't give a shit about anybody else. That's how he was. Can I swear on this podcast,
You
or are we not
can,
supposed to?
you may swear. And I wanted to just say one thing, like, I can't imagine, because now we're talking, this is in the 90s, right? So this is in
Yes.
mid late 90s, right? Now
Yeah,
there's no,
1999.
yeah,
Yeah.
so late 90s. And during this time, by the way, nobody's even talking about like self-help. And we had talked about prior to recording, you guys, back when we both got sober and in the 90s, no one was talking about like self-help. The word anxiety, I didn't even know that word. I mean, maybe it was written in a book, maybe that you read, but you're like, what does this mean? And who cares? And and
Right.
today, and to think back to that, like at a 14-year-old, when so that must have been again in the 70s, right? 70s, he gets
Right.
diagnosed. And in the 70s, there's no like self-help. I'm sure his mom could never go out and find like a whole group of moms that were like, oh, your son's going through this, let me help you. I mean, it was just like a time of like, go fend for yourself, figure it out. We're not going to admit anybody needs help, right?
Absolutely right. And that's exactly what, and I think when he was that age, he really felt like, all right, he's a 14-year-old being told he has cancer. And so again, we grew up in our summers together, right? So we were
Yeah.
the same age, never knew of a child that had cancer ever. And so he didn't have like that counseling, like, how does it feel to be told that you have cancer? Like that never existed. It was like, bam, 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 surgery, surgery, done, done. All right, get back to playing down at the beach or whatever. Yeah. And so at 30, when he's now diagnosed again, and he's got a wife who's pregnant after years of infertility, and like we're moving back to Connecticut to be around our friends and family, and life is so beautiful. We're building our own house there, and it was like so perfect. And then bam, he gets this news and does not know how to process it. Now, later on in life, when my son is diagnosed, those conversations between my ex-husband and I happened. Like you have no idea what it's like to be told you have cancer. Like that can really, it's one thing to have it and to go through it, but hearing those words as a child or a young adult, so it really knocked him off his feet. And from that point on, he was triggered. He was triggered, and then he never really got it together after that. And I know it's hard to read in the book a lot of the things that happened. I had to be as honest as possible. I don't want to hurt him, his memory, his family. I'm still close to them. It had nothing to do with that. It was not about bashing him. It was a real life event that happened with mental health, and a mental health issue, addiction. It's when all of that stuff comes together, the explosion that can happen. But that wasn't the man that I married. He wasn't the father that we anticipated him being. I mean, he'd even say that, during his years, he'd be like, I always wanted to be a better father. But he was at the grips of addiction and not getting the proper treatment for his mental health. So yeah, he was a decent, good man. He really was. He was in a sickness he could not get out of.
So I have to just say, and for those people that are just listening for the first time and don't really know my story, I was when you were describing your marriage falling apart and and just everything unraveling and you picking up big time. I mean, the same thing happened to me. I married an alcoholic. He was my best friend, right? Like we had this beautiful thing, right? You have this whole, and I actually lived it outside of Philadelphia as well, in Wayne, just west of downtown Philadelphia, and out on the main line. And I was so excited, right, to have this family, and it was going to be the white picket fence. I mean, this is again. I want to just say this because when we were growing up, I mean, it was like you get your Mrs. degree. That's what you grow up to do. You grow up to be a mom. Your mom gets you ready to be a mom. You're going to be a wife. You're going to build a house, and you're going to have this beautiful family, right? And you're going to have cocktail parties like they did, and you're going to belong to the right country clubs, and all this stuff that we're supposed to do. And then it falls apart, and you're like, oh my gosh. And I always use the example of like throwing a grenade in the living room because
Mm.
shrapnel hit everyone. Everybody was sad, right? Your husband's sad. Your son Hunter's sad. My 3 kids were sad. My husband was sad. But he was still in his addiction. And I was like, I can't feel this.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I know. You can't.
And there's so many women that are out there that have gone through the same thing we have.
Or they're going through it right now.
Exactly.
And they're
Exactly.
like, they're numbing their pain and they don't know how to get the help that they need. I would have done anything, anything to have somebody reach out to me or to read a book about addiction that wasn't written by a famous person, that wasn't written by, a notable person, that was just written by a suburban mom who has found herself really in a lot of trouble, addicted to the substance and drinking or whatever it is. I would have given anything for somebody to reach out to me and just say, you're going to be okay. I promise. You just need to do these things and I'm going to walk right by your side. And that comes later. When I got into recovery, I did get those women around me, but if, I know there's women sitting at home right now who have been locked in their house during COVID with their small children, having to work, having to help them with school, just physically being around chaos all day long. And they're popping pills to keep themselves calm. And all of a sudden they're like, I can't stop.
And I
I
think,
can't.
and what was what was your husband's name, his first name?
Well, I changed his name as in the book, it's Trevor, because
Okay, so we'll
for
call him Trevor to keep his anonymity. But I want to say something that you can imagine if you were to relate back to Trevor not having an answer. Okay, so it's full of fear. It's all full of fear. And where we're living today in this world since COVID, and I'm glad you brought that up because I know more people that died of alcoholism than died of COVID. Okay, that's the
yeah,
truth. And, everybody, I had people on the podcast from all over the world, and they'd be like, why is the liquor store open down the street, but I can't go to my church? And
yeah,
I can't go meet my friends, and I can't go touch somebody and feel love. And we can relate it back to Trevor feeling that sense of like, I'm alone, I'm scared, and I can't get help. And the moms that are out there today are feeling the same exact way. I can't get help. And the shame, as much as it's changed since when we both got sober. I mean, Deb got sober in 04 and I got sober in 06. God, thank you, thank you, thank you. But it's changed a lot, but it hasn't changed all the way, right? The
yeah.
shame is still there.
Especially if you have a family unit that doesn't know alcoholism or drug addiction. Our 2 families, they knew a little bit of alcoholism, but they never knew anybody who went into rehab or got into trouble with the law because of it. I mean, that was like, oh no, so when you don't have somebody in your life that you can relate to that has been through what you're going through, you feel so isolated and alone, and you're full of shame. Absolutely. I mean, I literally was getting handcuffed and arrested over and over again, and like, it's just, the way I was brought up, it's just, it can happen to anybody, but it was embarrassing and I didn't want to admit to it. So I would lie constantly. I would be like, no, no, oh, it's there. It's a misunderstanding. Or, I was always the victim, until I just said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it anymore. And,
And I have to give a shout out, by the way, to your mom and dad.
ugh,
Because I have to tell you, through that book, I was like so envious. I was like, oh my God, she is so freaking lucky. I mean, your mom would
so
move, your mom and dad would move next door. They'd move into your house. They'd be like there forever. I mean, you were so
uh,
blessed to have those parents because you did. I mean, when you talk about going into treatment and I think she was your roommate or she was somebody you had met and she had, oh my gosh, that story made in what she had, like she had gone out and she had a niece that she had given. I mean, it was like, I was like, I mean, tears were again, lots of times reading this book, I had tears running down my face. Even though as we all know, I've heard lots of stories, given that we've been in 12-step meeting church basements for a long time. I mean,
yes.
still, this brought a lot of tears because the way you wrote it, and it was so real, it was so real. And you went into treatment and it was like, I mean, talk about you weren't at the club that day, were you?
No, hell no. Oh my gosh. And the funniest part was when I finally surrendered and I called my dad and I said, okay, I'm ready. I will go into rehab, but I get to choose when I go and where I go. And I am going to Malibu. That fancy one in Malibu,
Yeah,
California,
yeah,
provinces or
yeah.
something like that. And because I had been looking into it, I'm like, oh, they're right on the water and they have like, massages and stuff. I'm like, and
And
that's the one
yoga.
I'm either going there or I'm not going at all. And well, later that night, I ended up taking my last fistful of pills that I had. And in the middle of the night, went into significant detox and was brought instead to Middletown, Connecticut rehab center, which is occupied by prisoners who, because of overcrowding, are doing their, time in this rehab. And so it was like I ended up in the complete opposite of the place that I wanted to go. But it's the place that saved my life. I mean, I could not have had it any other way. I needed to be with every single person that was in that rehab for me to really learn what this disease is all about. And it doesn't, it, and we're all the same. I mean, we all share this, our spirit and our soul is all the same. It's life circumstances that have gotten us to, be where we were. But man, it was something else. So yeah, no, I was not at the country club that day. Not even close.
Um, I want to ask you something. Were you raised with any sort of religion whatsoever? Like, did you have a relationship with God at all growing up?
I knew who God was, but I didn't know God. I know God now. I know him personally. I was raised Catholic until probably I was like 7 years old, and my brothers and I gave my parents such a hard time about going to church, even on Christmas, that they're like, you know what, forget it. We're not, because my mom was Protestant, my dad was Catholic, but neither one of them, they were just trying to do the right thing by their kids. They weren't religious people. And my dad had gone to years and years of Catholic school, so he had a real bad taste in his mouth. And my mother always had a strong belief in God, but not religious wise. So anyways, so I knew and I believed that there was a God, but I personally know him, and that's the big difference. I never, and I'm glad that it happened that way too, because I don't want to know anybody else's God. I want to know my God. And my God is not punishing, and my God is not, you know, you're going to go to hell if you do this, that, or the other thing. Very accepting, very loving, very nurturing. And again, my relationship with him grew through the fellowship because of, we talk about, we pray, all of that. But it really wasn't until my son got sick. Well, two things happened. One was the prayer that was said for me to lift the compulsion. That was like one of my, I mean,
Where were
that
you?
is,
Where were you when you had that first will you tell us all where you were? Because I remember where I was, and because I too, like you, I was raised Catholic, right? And we always went, and my dad's Jewish. My mom was, God rest her soul, Catholic. And so my dad would pinch somebody so we could get out of church, right? So we could run away. And then they went through a tumultuous divorce. Then I got married in the Catholic Church. And then, when my kids were being born was when all the stuff was going on in the Catholic Church. And I was like, I'm not going to put my boys in this. So we went to the Episcopal Church. But I remember falling to my knees that day, in August in the Jersey Shore when it's 800 degrees, and falling to my knees and saying, God, please help me. What was your story?
oh my gosh. Well, I had the God, please help me before I went into rehab, but it was still not like, it was just like, please help me. It wasn't like,
Yeah, I was desperate.
well, but what I was desperate too, but only because I think I ran out of options and I knew I was going to either take my own life or I was going to end up in rehab. So, but this was my first spiritual awakening, we'll call it, is when I got out of rehab. That first day I got out of rehab, and they tell you to go to 90 and 90 meetings, 90 days. And at that point, because after the detox and after I was desperate not to go backwards, I was like, I don't ever want to go through what I just went through. So
Mm-mm.
I went to the congregational church down the street where they said there was an AA meeting happening at noon. And so I get there at 11:30, and I go to this room where I think the AA meeting is, because there's lots of people in it and they're all sitting at these chairs. And at the front of the room is this gentleman, and I'm like, oh, this must be it. And this must be a speaker meeting, because AA has different types of meetings. And this guy, if anybody's standing in front of the room like this with a mic, they're usually telling their story to the room. So I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like, geez, I'm already late. I can't believe this. Why the pamphlet told me it was 12 and it's 11:30 and blah, blah, blah. And so I kind of go peering in, and I see this older woman. Now I was 34 at the time, so she was probably 60, but she looked, I think, just looked older to me. So, and I see her go, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I come in, and everybody kind of looks at me, and I notice immediately that everybody is older, and they're like excited to see me. I'm like, oh, this is nice. So I sit down, and this is funny because I have this right here. And I sit down and I look at the book that everybody's reading, and she's like, we're on this is my recovery Bible, but she had a Bible. We're on Samuel 11 or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a Bible study. This is not an AA meeting. I just walked into a Bible study. No wonder everybody is 80 years old here. So I was like, oh my God. And then I could see kind of out the window through to this other hallway, people walking in. I'm like, that's the AA meeting. And I'm like, what do I do now? It's so typical of me to like do something like that, just be in the wrong place, wrong time, trying to do something. But anyway, so um they took a break, and the pastor approaches me, and I said, I'm so sorry. This is not that I don't want to learn about the Bible, but I really meant to go to this AA meeting. And he says to me, come with me and let's have a conversation. I said, okay. So we go to his office, and he says, tell me a little bit about yourself. And why are you here? I said, well, I just got out of rehab, you know, this, that, the other thing. Do you have children? Yes. I have one son. What's his name? What's his age? Ask me all the questions. And he says, if there's one thing right now that's going to keep you from relapsing, what is it? And I said, it's the compulsion to use. Like, I feel sick all the time. My head hurts. I know all I need is one little pill and all that's going to go away. I'm going to feel better. I'm like, and it's constantly in my ear. And he said, okay. He said, go to this meeting and, you know, check in if you want to talk once in a while, whatever. And I said, okay. And he went his way and I went my way. And the following week, I saw him at that church that same day. And he said to me, how are you doing? And I said, I'm good. And he said, how's that compulsion, the cravings? And I had to think about it. And I thought to myself, well, I still feel sick. Every part of me hurts, but I had an actual craving. And I said, no, I actually haven't had a craving. And he said, good, that's what we prayed for. So he went back into that Bible study with all those people, and they said a prayer for Hunter and I, and they prayed that the compulsion would be lifted from me. And it was. I had to think about it because I was like, you know, you're still not feeling good for a while. But I was like, come to think of it, no, I haven't wanted to use. And they prayed. And then I was like, okay, prayer works. Prayer works. But the second time when I got on my knees and I crumbled was when my son was sick. That was a whole different scenario because I really didn't know if he was going to survive, and I needed him in the worst way. I didn't have my parents were there, of course. My ex-husband was in and out because his drug use just skyrocketed when Hunter got his diagnosis. I had friends, but when I went home at night, I didn't have anybody in my life to just hold me and be like, honey, it's going to be okay, and let me cry on them for hours and hours. It was my pillow, you know? And I got really tempted one night. It was a really, really bad night. Hunter was, he had given up. He had given up the fight. And I came home to his, you know, bottles and bottles of painkillers, Oxycontins and Dilaudid and methadone and all of that. And I sat with him on my bed thinking, I just need one pill, one little pill, and then I'm not going to care as much, and I'll be able to handle this, you know, because I'll be high and I'll feel good. I'll be able to handle this. I just need to take one little pill. And then that's when my dog, Tika, my little Boston Terrier, jumped out of her bed onto mine and kind of, you know, into my lap and snuggled with me. And that's when I kind of got out of that spell and I fell to the floor and just prayed and prayed and prayed. And it was, my life has never been the same since then. It has never been the same. And as painful as all of that was, I had to go through it. I had to go through it to know how strong God's love is for me and how I didn't need anybody else. I didn't need anybody else. Now I have like all of the love and support, right? And all of the hugs and all of that. But I know that it's lovely to have and I love having it, but I don't, all I need is my higher power. All I need is God. Because that was a terrible, terrible time. And then after that, the loss of a lot of people in our life and Hunter's leg and just all of it. But I had a renewed strength during that time. I knew I would never, ever have to go back to any kind of substance to numb my pain. I knew that I'm never alone. And I can find comfort by myself with my higher power. And that has carried me through many devastating things. So that's when my fall to my knees, pray to God, and open my heart 100%. I just did. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I needed to give back somehow. I needed to honor my God and share what he did for me. And I feel like this book is to honor him.
It's, I have to tell you, like, when Hunter got sick in the book, and I'm thinking about it, and because I have 3 kids, I'm a mom of 3 kids, and I was a single mom for a really long time. And I remember, and it wasn't that long ago, that I fell to my knees one day, and because I was worried about someone, because none of them are near me. I'm in Florida, one's in Minnesota, one's in Vermont, and one's in Texas right now. And just the thought of anything happening to them. And it happened to, like, that worst nightmare. And I've always thought to myself, how would I stay sober? How would I stay sober with something that is literally so painful? And as a mom, it's like you can't tell anybody what that feels like. Like, yeah, you love your family, your parents, and you love your husband or your partner, whatever it is, but it's like your kids are like, ah. And
You
when
know,
you talk about it, and when he's in the hospital and he's calling you and he's like, Mom, I just want you to come back. And their doctor and the nurses are like, you can't come back. He has to be in isolation. And you're like, wait a minute. And I just, you know, it's true with God with us. Like, when in the beginning, when I went a day, when they had got up there, I'm like, bring it on. I love God. I've always loved God. I don't think I would have made it through my divorce. I don't think I would have definitely, I mean, I just, when it was on there, it was like, I don't even know if I would have made it through my childhood, right? Without God. And I see a lot of people that go into 12-step meetings and they're like, the God thing. I don't like the God thing. I'm like, dude, if you rely on a human being, another human being, and you put all of your credit and your everything into this another human being, they're going to let you down. I mean, it's just when in doubt. And I remember you also mentioning that your first sponsor went out, and she was your
yeah,
best friend, and you were
yeah.
going through all this hard, I mean, and your sponsor goes out. And that's just an example right there that, like, we can't rely on other humans.
You're so right. You're so right. Because humans aren't perfect, and shit happens. And that was that was the night she told me on the phone call home. I was like, and it was almost like God being like, all right, I'm gonna wallop you one more time. And then you're really gonna know that I'm here for you. Because that was pretty rough. I mean, and what I don't write in the book, and I wish that I did, because people ask me, and it was just an oversight, it wasn't on purpose, but about 3 years ago, Kristen, my sponsor in there, reached out to me, and she was in crisis. And her boyfriend at the time, the one I write about, was diagnosed with cancer. He's okay, he's survived. But she said to me, crying, how did you do this? I can't do this on my own. And I thought at first, I was like, oh, well, this is interesting, isn't it? But I said to her, the way I did it was I surrounded myself with people in AA, from women in AA, that were capable, because of the work that they've done on themselves and them in their recovery, were capable of holding me up when I couldn't hold myself up. So my advice to you, I said this to her, I said, is to go to that Wednesday night women's meeting, which is the one that I met her at years ago. I said, and it's happening tonight, still goes on at 6 p.m., and get back into your recovery. And she did. And she's been sober ever since.
Mm.
And she doesn't have a boyfriend anymore either. So she's doing really, really well. But, that all had to happen in that way as well, or else what would it had meant? It just, there's always a reason for what we go through.
Oh, it's so true. And, like, my favorite line in the big book, and if you don't know what the big book is, it's called the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're out there listening. And it says, faith without works is dead. And I know it comes from the Bible because everybody tells me for that came from the Bible, that didn't come from there. I'm like, I know, but I wasn't reading the Bible. I haven't even read the book. I've got 10 probably in my house Bibles, but I've never read one from cover to cover. It is a goal of mine though in this year. But when I read that faith without works is dead, and it's like, wow, I really have to work at this every day. And people, don't you get people saying to you, you still go to those meetings? And you're like, yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Even I get that all the time. Even my parents who have been bared witness to my recovery are like, so do you have like Christmas parties at those places that you go? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like they just think it's like a whole social, I don't even know. But yeah, they just don't, people don't get it if they don't get it, and that's another thing about this book. And I've been hearing back from a lot of people about that aren't in recovery, but they might know somebody who is in recovery. They're like, we had no idea what it takes to stay in recovery and the steps and everything. So even if you're listening and you're not in recovery, but you have somebody that needs recovery or is in recovery and you just want to know more about the steps, this is good. But I wanted to circle back to what you said about the Bible and reading the Bible. So, and this is how this entire thing started to unravel with the book. Okay. So I had always been in corporate sales for 25 years. Okay. And I was with a company in Connecticut for 17. Then I let around in 2020, I was asked to go to another company. And so I was there for 2.5 years, and then the company didn't do well and we were all laid off. And so all of a sudden I found myself like without a job. And I've always had a job, like paycheck, insurance. And that's just who I am. Like I feel safer just knowing that. And I'm like a worker among workers. Okay. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I was 53 at the time. And I'm like furiously filling out applications, sending resumes. And every time I'm like reading the job descriptions, which is what I've been doing for, the description of a job that I've been doing for my whole life, I'm like, ugh, I don't really want to do this anymore, but I have to because I know nothing else, right? So Kevin says to me one day when I'm having an absolute meltdown because I'm getting very scared at this point.
Wait, we have to tell
And
everybody who Kevin is because people don't know who Kevin is because this is the first time you've said him. All right, tell everybody who Kevin is really
oh
quick.
yeah, Kevin's my longtime significant other.
We can't say boyfriend
We met.
anymore, even though it sounds so cute.
It's not, I can say boyfriend, but I'm like, and then I feel like I'm a 16-year-old, me and my boyfriend, so whatever. And sometimes I call him like, the dude that I live with. So, we just have fun with that. But because at this age, like most people are married, we're not married, and it's how we want it to be. But anyway, so Kevin and I we knew each other in high school. We were good friends, same group of people. And then I moved out of our town that we grew up in as the day after graduation. My parents had moved down to a different town in Connecticut. So we lost contact, whatever. 30 years later, Facebook brought us back together. When my son was sick, he reached out and we've been together ever since. So he was, and he's an entrepreneur, so he's never really worked for anybody. He did years ago, but he's always been just so confident and like, it's going to be okay. Do what you love and everything is going to follow. And I'm like, yeah, easy for you to say, but anyway, so he says to me, if you had all the money that you needed or wanted, what would you be doing with your days? And I said, well, I want to read the Bible. I've never read the Bible. So that would be like a goal, paid front to back. I said I would take on more sponsees and work. Like I wanted to go into the jails and the rehab centers here and work with women. I said I would probably write my memoir. That's something I've wanted to do for many years now, but never had the time. And I said, and while I'm at it, if I've got all this money, I'm just gonna, throw a bunch of small nonprofits, because I started a nonprofit for pediatric oncology, and it was really hard to get money donated. So I would like to help small nonprofits to kind of get off their feet. And he said, well, just start doing that. Like, start doing those things and a job will follow. So I said, okay. So every day I got up and I'd read the Bible. And then I started going to Salvation Army Rehab Center, got a bunch of sponsees, going to the jail, working with women in the jail. And I started writing my book. And I reached out, I got an editor and started writing on that. And I wasn't making any money, but I was so fulfilled. Like, my heart, every day I loved getting up. I was like, "Ooh, this is so great." And it just made me feel so, so good. Well, fast forward a couple months after all this happened. Um, a couple months after all this happened, a friend of ours came into town to Longboat Key, and they were somewhat newly retired. They just moved here. We got to know them pretty well by showing them around. And before they left to go back north for the summer, they said to me, "We have a family foundation that we started a couple years ago, and we would like to hire you to run this foundation." And what that means was to find small nonprofits that we can help build a sustainable business for them. So I was like, "You've got to be kidding me, right?" And they're like, "No, no, no. We know you have experience with nonprofits. We trust that you know what you're doing." So every single thing on that list that I wrote down came to fruition. I mean, it's not my money that I'm giving away, but it's a foundation. I know. Isn't that bizarre?
No, it's God. It's God.
So
It is so
it's,
God. It's so
it
good.
is
It's
so
so God.
God.
Because I
Yep.
don't believe in
I
coincidences.
invested in I invested in him and reading the Bible and learning his word. And he then invested in me and helped with the book and with the foundation. So I know, isn't that something?
Deb, I could talk to you all day. I could talk to you all day because everything that you've talked about, everything, having God, having a higher power, reading the Bible, no, trusting, getting that
Yeah.
place you really have to trust. Like that day that I was a couple months ago and I fell to my knees and I was driving my poor husband crazy and I was like about my kids and I'm just like, I have to just let go.
Yeah.
And step 3 of Alcoholics Anonymous, which has always been the hardest one for me, is to let go and trust in a higher power, um, has been one that it's like I'm constantly working that.
Yeah,
Everyone's
you
like,
got
it's
it.
step 4. Everyone's like step 4. I'm like, it's not step 4. It is step 3 for me. And go back. And when you were talking about, going to your first meeting, and I remember like when I first was like going to my first year in church basements, I was like, everybody needs to go to this program. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't even matter if you're a drug addict. You need to go to a meeting. They're gonna get the answers there because it's like the magic. I mean, Bill Wilson and Bob were like, I mean, Dr. Bob and Bill W were like, that was divine intervention. And, coming up with this program and, the Dalai Lama, everybody else says it's the best thing to come out of the West being from here. And it's like amazing. And I think that it's great that all these people are getting sober, like sober sis and sober da 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 and da 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 da. And you want to have, it's really self-help groups. Let's just call it that because that's what it is. It's like just a self-help group. Um, but being able that we got sober in the time when there weren't any other options. We didn't have options. We didn't even have Facebook. I mean, was there Facebook back then? I don't even think there was. Was there? We got sober.
Oh, no, 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 there was not Facebook. And as a matter of fact, there wasn't even texting, because I remember being like a couple years into sobriety and being like A, B, 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 when with the
Yeah.
flip phones where you had to like I was like, I remember that those being my first text, and I was like, "Oh, this thing can take a picture." Like, yeah. So we were we were not in the technology age at all. Yeah, at all. I mean, I found my lawyer literally on at the library I went to the yellow pages. Like that's how I found my lawyer. 'Cause-
Life was a lot
I
easier
mean,
back then, wasn't it? And you had I mean, you go home, you'd be like, oh, there's a box sitting there that had a red light that said I had a message. It's like nobody knew where
yeah,
you were or cared. They're like, you're going out for dinner and eating food. Great, good for you. Do I want to see a picture of it? No, but thank you.
no, yes, I know, I know. Oh my gosh. Or you come home and that red light wouldn't be beeping and you'd be
Yeah.
like, oh,
Oh.
I guess I'll wait for another day for his call or whatever.
Exactly. And then we didn't know about parties happening. We had no
Oh,
idea in
yeah.
high school if somebody had a party and we weren't invited, it was like, no, nobody really knew. We
Yeah.
didn't know.
No, and now it's like I feel bad for these kids. I really, really do.
It's no
So,
wonder that mental health is the way it is today. I think that what you did took so much courage. It's something that so many people have told me to write a book, Elizabeth, write a book, write a book. I don't know what's stopping me, but I know when it's supposed to happen, it'll happen. I don't need to force anything. Um, but to be able to share on this platform has given me so much peace and so much. I feel so blessed that I can have this podcast and I can have people on like you that are speaking your truth and showing other women and other people, let's just say, that you can get better and you can have a life beyond your wildest dreams. And when I was in those first meetings and people, I don't know how much, it doesn't seem like people say that as much as they used to say it. It's like, you're going to have a life beyond your wildest dreams in meetings. And I'd be like, bullshit. My life was like dancing on the bar, getting, acting totally crazy, not waking up
yeah.
the next day, not remembering one thing that I'd done. And I didn't believe it. And now, with us both having big anniversaries coming up, it's like pretty amazing that we are still here and we're still doing it one day at a time. And you've gone that extra step. And if you guys are out there, read this book. I have a girlfriend coming over actually to babysit my dogs because I get to go see my kids this weekend. And she's newly in recovery. And I'm like, I'm giving you this book when you get here. You're going to read this. She's like, okay, I can't wait. But to be able to pass it on is such a gift. And thank you so much. And thank you to Dana again for reaching out to me and telling me about you and everything, because it's been a pleasure, real pleasure meeting you.
You, same with you. It's lovely. I love that you I thought that you and Dana were friends. Like I didn't realize she was a listener. Like you treat your listeners like friends because you responded right away and it's great that you're very reachable to us. So thank you for doing everything that you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. You guys, now I'm going to have the link on your, be able to go right to Amazon you're going to go to my description that's on the side, on my website, or if you're wherever you're watching this, it will give you a link. It's not very hard. All you have to do is click that link. It'll take you right to Deb's book. And I just want you guys to know if you're out there that you don't have to be alone. That's a lie, right?
That's right. That's right. And just to talk real quick about you dancing on the bars, like I was I was a loner in my addiction, right? So I wasn't out partying with people and sharing my drugs and so I know that there's women and men out there that are the same. Like they become addicted and they just don't know where to go or what to do and nobody else knows what they're struggling with. So we are here to help you and you can get better. And yeah, my website is deblawlessmiller.com and my contact information is there. So please email, reach out any way you need to. But I really appreciate being on this show. This is a lot of fun.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, you guys, until next time, I'll be back on Wednesday. And until then, keep getting busy living.